Welcome to the Homeschooling Global Summit. I have Pam Laricchia here, a super special guest. I'm really excited to have her join us. And Pam is a longtime unschooling mom of 3 now grown children from Ontario, Canada. And she loves exploring unschooling and sharing the fascinating things she's discovered about learning and parenting along the way. She hosts a weekly Exploring Unschooling podcast and recently created the Living Joyfully Network online community, bringing together unschooling parents to support and learn from each other as they question and explore many of the conventional beliefs around learning and parenting. So Pam's writings have been published in various magazines. She's also written 5 books about unschooling, including The Unschooling Journey, a field guide. You can check out Pam's website at livingjoyfully.ca. So welcome, Pam. Thanks for coming.
Oh, hi, Liz. It's so great to see you and finally meet you face to face.
No, I'm super excited. I mentioned it to Pam that when my kids and I left the public school system about 4 years ago, I found her podcast and blog, and she was a big inspiration to us on the self-directed journey versus, just doing what a lot of people do is buying a box curriculum or an online curriculum. So it has helped us a lot. My kids feel a lot more confident and happy with their learning journey. So I want to thank you for inspiring us.
Oh, thanks so much, Liz. That's cool to know.
Well, I wanted to also mention to everyone that we interviewed Pam last year, and I really encourage everyone to watch the 2019 summit for Pam Laricchia, because she shared a lot of her personal journey and how her kids learned, how she got into unschooling, and did a lot of kind of more unschooling 101 talk there. But today we are going to talk specifically about the value of strong and connected parent-child relationships when it comes to learning. So I'm super excited to talk to you about that. So Pam, to get ready for this, I did listen to one of your podcasts that came out a couple years ago, titled The Value of Relationships for Learning. So I have a little bit of an inkling about what we're going to talk about, why a close parent-child relationship is important. So I just want you to elaborate more some of the thought-provoking insights that you had with that topic to our audience. So can you just let us know briefly your story and how you got into unschooling? And again, people can research you a bit more to learn the long story.
Yeah. I was gonna, the short synopsis basically is just that school really wasn't working well for my oldest, right? He's a visual spatial learner, a kinesthetic learner. So, that classroom environment was a challenge for him. So the first few years I worked with his teachers and the principals that came through, and they were mostly very lovely people. But they too were tied to that classroom environment, right? So even the accommodations that they were able to make left the taste for both me and my son that there was something, wrong with him, because this was the environment that they had and they needed him to fit into it. I finally discovered when he was in grade 4, homeschooling. I had never heard of it, didn't know it was a thing, didn't know it was legal. So it was a few weeks from when I discovered it existed, did a touch of research to make sure it was legal, what it was. And my husband and I decided, you know what, we're going to try it. You can try it and see how it goes. We thought, well, we'll give it a year and see what happens. I offered it up to all 3 of my kids. So they were in grade 4, grade 2, and junior kindergarten at the time, and all 3 of them jumped at it, and it ended up working really well, and they never went back.
Awesome.
That's the short version.
That's the short version. And you eventually transitioned from homeschooling to unschooling. So for those of us watching who are new to the concept of unschooling, can you please define it? Or
Sure.
Or self-directed learning. I mean, I know there's different words to describe it.
Yeah. And I have a podcast episode where I talk about that in depth. That would be really fun if people are interested in that, how unschooling and self-directed learning and all homeschooling, how that all fits together. I love that piece. But basically, unschooling is a style of homeschooling, right? And it's really defined at its root as learning without a curriculum. Now, that sounds really straightforward, but the implications of that are really, really life-changing, because it grows beyond an educational method to really becoming more of a lifestyle. Because you discover that human beings truly are hardwired for curiosity. They're hardwired for learning, for creativity, for connection, for engaging in the things that they're interested in. So with unschooling, we don't focus on the conventional idea that it's the job of childhood to learn things, so that once you're an adult, you can go out and live, right? Focus on living your life. Rather, we embrace the idea of lifelong learning, so that we're always learning, no matter our age. And I'm sure this is something everybody can relate to. Human beings really are sponges when we're exploring the things that we're interested in. Learning really does happen naturally. Just soak it on up.
Exactly. But I wanted to ask you, because some people interpret self-directed to mean hands-off. And I know that people have not really understood unschooling well, and others were saying, well, that's not unschooling, that's neglect. So can you explain it a little bit more? And, you know, I know that you really encourage parents to have a solid connection with their children. So how do we create an environment that cultivates our children's learning using the hardwired learning? Oops, I'll edit that out. So how do we create an environment that cultivates our children's learning using the hardwired human traits that you often talk about, which are curiosity, learning, connection, and engagement?
I love this question, because this is one of those big aha moments on the journey to unschooling as well. Because when you look at the term self-directed, right, it's reasonably easy to understand that it means moving away from control. We're not going to be telling our kids what they have to learn or how they should be learning things. But the thing is, sometimes parents don't take the next step, or it takes a while. You know, it's part of the learning curve, it's part of the journey. But if you're not using the control paradigm in your relationships with your children, what do you do instead? Because if you just take that away, you kind of leave a vacuum. And in that vacuum, eventually chaos starts to bubble up, because nobody kind of knows what they're doing, right? So instead, with unschooling, the focus is, as we move away from control, we then move toward connection. So our focus is on being in relationship with our children and helping them accomplish the things that they want to do. Because as unschooling parents, we have discovered that cultivating that supportive and thriving learning environment comes from focusing on cultivating a connected and trusting relationship with our child. That turns out to be the foundation. Because if they don't feel safe with you, if they're worried about feeling judged by their response when they come to you, they're less apt to come to you with their questions when they're learning about something, right? So that means less learning is happening in the moment. They're just like, oh, okay, I don't want to ask about that. Maybe I'll figure it out later. And if they don't feel that you respect them and you celebrate them for who they are, if they're worried that you might minimize or mock the things that they enjoy in general, they're less likely to seek you out to share their joy about those things, right? The things that they're doing day to day, just the little things. Again, that can mean less learning for them, because we as parents don't know as much about our kids when they're not willing to come to us, right? If they're worried about how we may say, oh, that's a silly thing. Don't look at that, come look at this. Or if they think you don't like the things that they're fascinated by, they may well even stop pursuing that interest, right? Because they want to make you happy. They want to feel good in your eyes. So they may start hiding the time that they're spending with it too, or just drop it altogether because they do want to please you. So all those disconnecting moments erode trust in your relationship with them and impede their learning. They don't get to dive as deep as they'd like into their interests. They don't get to bounce ideas around with you and process through what they're learning with you. And you don't know what they're truly interested in all the time, so that you can bring more related and fascinating stuff into their world, right? That's the beauty of unschooling and the web of connections. When we know what our kids are interested in, we can find other things that are related and bring them into their world and make their world bigger, make their learning bigger. But if we don't have that trusting, connected relationship with them, those moments are less likely to happen. Mm-hmm. So the more hands-off approach really is a downward spiral that grows that disconnection in the relationship, stunts learning, and then it just circles downward and downward.
Yeah, and I see that unfortunately with a lot of public school parents, or the kids come home, especially when they're in middle school or high school, and you ask, "What did you do today? What did you learn?" Nothing. Like they
Yeah.
don't want they don't want to share it. When I see it with my kids and other homeschool kids, they're eager to share with their parents what they're up to. Okay, great. So now, where did you come across the idea that relationships with our children are essential for unschooling and learning to thrive?
Well, it is an idea that I came across early on from experienced unschooling parents. So, as soon as I heard about homeschooling and the kids wanted to come home, then I quickly came across the idea of deschooling. So it's like, okay, let's relax for a while, kind of think of it like a vacation. And then I was reading like crazy about homeschooling, and unschooling was a style. And then I dove in that way. So I had heard that idea. And then I also came across it over the years through reading other researchers and writers, including John Holt, who originally coined the term unschooling, right? So I really love what he had to say about that. It was one of my favorite ways that he put it was in his book, Escape from Childhood, The Needs and Rights of Children. He wrote that children need love, stability, consistent and unequivocal care, and lasting relationships with people who are profoundly enough interested in them to look after them with warmth, gaiety, and patience. I just love the way he put that.
Yeah,
So
it's great. Can you unpack that a little bit more? Because there's a lot there.
There really is, isn't there? Yeah, yeah. No, I love it. So he mentions the importance of not only love, but stability. So the children not only feel loved in the moment, but can trust it to be there in the future, right? It's unconditional love. So then he talks about consistent and unequivocal care, right? That reminds us that it's not about when it's convenient for us, nor about judging their needs, right? Their needs are their needs, full stop. That unequivocal and consistent means, not when it's convenient, I guess is the right word, convenient for us, to look at their timetable. It's when they're excited about these things. Lasting relationships reminds us to take that lifelong perspective, right? Because we will be in relationship with our children however long we're both alive. This really isn't just about childhood, right? We will always be their parent, right? We will always be in relationship with them. His other piece, with people who are profoundly enough interested in them. I love that. It reminds us that it's not about a parental obligation, but about choosing. As parents, we are choosing to care for and about our children as unique and interesting human beings. Again, this is that lifelong perspective. We are actually interested in and curious about them as human beings, not just our obligation as parents. With warmth and gaiety reminds us that children are not a nuisance, right? That is not a helpful perspective to bring to your relationship with your child. That our relationships with them are not less than our relationships with the other adults in our lives, right? These are truly fruitful and wonderful and valuable relationships for us too. And with patience reminds us to join them where they are, just as we would with any friend that we value, right? Not always rushing them to come and meet us. Here, I'm interested in this. Here, let's go do this. No, I want to do this at our pace. But with patience means let's look at them. Let's stop what we're thinking and pulling for and take a moment to look through their eyes like we would with a friend. What would you like to do? How would you like to do that? Be patient and waiting for them as they, catch up with us or as they get ready for it, or walking over to them to join them. The really interesting thing, though, is that by this, he doesn't mean hovering over our children. I think that's such a beautiful distinction to make, right? He doesn't mean jumping in without being asked or doing things for our children. That's that patience thing again, right? We don't want to jump in, our child's trying to accomplish something, we can do it faster. We jump in. No, that's not the point. The point is doing it at their pace, right? Letting them do it. He's talking about being in relationship with them, right? That shift away from power over, that adults know better, know more. Sure, we can definitely add value, but again, it's at our child's pace at our child's interest. They're going to be asking questions of us. We don't need to jump in and presuppose what the answers might be or what it is that they're trying to do. So we're caring about them as human beings, not as lesser children that need teaching all the time. So yeah, I love that quote.
I do too. And thank you so much for elaborating what John Holt had to say. And the patience thing is something that I'm working on, because that's my weakness, is I'm an impatient person. And so that I think will be my challenge this year for parent development, self-development, is to be more patient with my kids. And yeah, thank you so much. John Holt was somebody that I started researching as well several years ago. And I want to encourage everyone to try to find his interview on Phil Donahue show that was like in the 70s, because he was a trailblazer. I mean, he was on Donahue talking about homeschooling, and people thought he was crazy. And look at us now. We have millions and millions of people intentionally homeschooling around the world, and many accidentally because of the school shutdown. But he was ahead of everyone's time. Okay, so, as homeschoolers or unschoolers, how we often do this initially to replace school. We're dissatisfied with the traditional school system for some reason, like you did, and we did as well, although we wanted to change our lifestyle. But other than learning, you've said that cultivating strong and connected relationships with our children is fundamental, that learning naturally beautifully bubbles up. I love that phrase. So can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, I'd love to. Because once we step outside the school system, and even, here we go again, outside the lens of childhood, because we're looking at cultivating a lifelong love of learning, right? It's a lifestyle, it's a way of living. I find it really interesting to look at the needs of human beings in general, right? And so one well-known framework is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And that's a pyramid where our most basic needs lie at the bottom. And then each of those needs need to be met before we can move up the pyramid to higher level needs, right? So the bottom two are the basic survival needs, physiological and safety. We need food and water. We need warmth and rest for our bodies to function well, right? And then a safe environment that keeps fear at bay. Fear for our well-being, our safety, right? So when those needs are unmet, meeting them rightly takes the person's attention and focus fully, right? There's no attention left to be learning new things. Once you manage to meet those, the next two are psychological. So first, there's the need to feel a sense of belonging and acceptance, to feel loved, right? And then there's esteem, feelings of self-worth and confidence and control over their lives, which sounds really similar to what John Holt was talking about, right?
Yep.
So again, meeting these needs takes precedence before a person can move up the hierarchy there. So if they're regularly feeling negative emotions like rejection and anxiety, you've got elevated stress hormones, right? They physically impair learning and memory. But once those physical and emotional needs are met reasonably consistently, because things come up, human beings, and kids included here, can spend their time at the top of Maslow's hierarchy, meeting their self-fulfillment or self-actualization needs. And it's here where you have that curious and creative mindset of exploration. And this is where learning thrives, where it naturally and beautifully bubbles up.
I love that. And, I just look at the kids around the world and how, unfortunately, the kids in a traditional school system don't have the chance to focus on the top of the pyramid of self-actualization. But how do unschooling families meet that need for their children, according to Maslow's hierarchy, better than others, like in a public school or a much more strict curriculum, education-based system? And how does it help with the unschoolers' learning?
Yeah, I love that question. Although I don't often think about it in comparison to others, for me, so much of learning with unschooling has been focusing on how does it work for our family? Because unschooling looks very different for many families. And there's many, like you were talking about, you guys are travel is part of the focus of your family as well, right? So there's all different aspects there. But all parents are working to meet their family's needs for shelter and food and physical safety, right? And then once they've got those met, they are focused on meeting their children's emotional needs. But I guess the fundamental difference with unschooling is that we typically give our children more control over their lives, right, than conventional families do, which then cultivates those feelings of self-worth and confidence. Children really are very capable, given the space, to make choices on their timetable. That is something that they often can't get in the classroom, right? And our focus on developing connected and trusting relationships goes a long way to minimizing those negative emotions and stress that can impair learning. Of course, as we mentioned, bad things happen in life, but our trusting and unconditional support help our children to move through those stressful times more gracefully. They don't get stuck there as long often. They know they've got that love and support, and people who will help them work through it, will process them, won't try to control them, won't try to tell them that's wrong, won't say, you know, we're too busy, we need to move on to the next thing. And so what that does is really help them spend more time in that learning and self-actualization zone.
Excellent. So, you know, as we know right now, over 1 billion kids have been out of school because of the virus. And so the traditional school system is scrambling and trying to do distance learning and all that kind of stuff. So I'm hoping that there's going to be some reform in education, because not every parent can unschool or homeschool. You know, they have to go to work or whatever. So if you could wave your magic wand and kind of bless the traditional school system with some advice. You know, first, what are the needs that aren't being met by many of these schools that make it difficult for children who attend to learn? And what could you advise for the schools to take on as far as, you know, self-directed learning or better connections with the kids? What could you say could improve the situation there? Because there's the anxiety and depression and stress over all the testing is rampant. So what would you suggest?
Well, I mean, that's why I love all the opportunities for the self-directed learning centers and stuff that are starting to pop up, because they're realizing that it truly is harder to learn something that you're not interested in. Like, full stop. Like, adults, always take a moment to think about your own learning as well. What do you remember? And what did you enjoy learning about? So often it's our hobbies, right? The things that we dove into as adults, because finally we could dive into it the way that we like to learn it. As I was talking about, my older son's learning style did not mesh well with the classroom style. So once you're free to pick and choose how you like to learn things, that is also super important. Because if you're not interested in something, just think about that for a second. You're left really trying to memorize it rather than actually understanding it, right? Because if you're not interested in it, it doesn't connect to anything that has any meaning in your life right now. It's really mostly a random factoid or a random skill, like remember the process to multiply these large numbers together or whatever, right? So you're really just memorizing it and then just trying to remember it for the test. It's not something that you often remember later on. Like, I remember memorizing, you know, dates for history and stuff like that. And if I wasn't interested in it, you know, 2 months later, I wasn't going to remember it. So the question of, did you even really learn it, is a really interesting one to ask yourself. As you mentioned, the classroom can be a super stressful place with lots of anxiety and rejection and just that feeling of being graded and watched, right? And constantly told what to do is not conducive to feeling confident and in control of their lives. So being able to bring those aspects in, one of the things I talk about with unschooling, when people are first coming and learning about it, I'll often get questions, you know, well, what do you do about testing? What do you do? But you know what? I'm hanging out with my kids. I see them using new words that they've come across. I see them saying something that shows it's like, hey, where'd you pick that up? You know? You can see the learning in action. You don't need to test it. And the purpose of testing is truly only to prove for either the school system or report cards for the parents that something is happening. So, you know, if you can take that aspect out and understand that it so often causes more harm than good, and parents can be even, even with kids in school, even with kids going to learning centers, all those kinds of things, parents can still have that connected relationship with them, trusted relationship with them, talk with them. Like you said, what did you do at school? Well, if they're doing things that are interesting to them, instead of doing whatever the curriculum says, they're more excited to share. And if you as parents don't diss what it is they're excited about, again, they're still excited to share. And then you see that's how you see the learning. That's how you see the development.
Right.
And the other really interesting thing I love about learning is it's not like a curriculum expects step by step by step, right? So often it's like that sponge, and then there's a huge leap, and then it's kind of stagnant for a while, right? Either as connections are being made, or as they're stuck on something and it's not making sense and they're keeping at it, or they step away for a little bit and then they come back to it. And then there's kind of another huge leap. Like it's a little step, huge step, maybe a step backwards, hovering there. It's really interesting that learning is not what we expect, this systematic, quarter by semester, I've learned more, this is my grade for it. That really doesn't reflect what learning is like. So, to be able to create environments that are much more conducive to the way human beings, like as an adult, how do you learn best? That works for kids too,
Yep.
right? Kids are human beings. This is how we as human beings like to learn. And it looks in practice different. Some people do like to read a lot, right? Some people do like to listen. Some people like to be moving. Like all the different learning styles are all equally valid. And to be able to create a space where they can pursue what they're interested in the ways that they like to pursue it, so much nice, so much less stress, so much less anxiety. When you're not testing them and standing over them, you're trusting them to learn, because human beings are wired to learn. Human beings are wired to be curious. And if you're not trying to always direct that, you just sit back and are amazed, aren't you?
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I can just attest, because of my kids, that Pam is speaking the truth. I mean, my kids are thriving now that they have more freedom to choose what they want to learn and how to do it. So in the podcast, you mentioned the whole concept of flow, and how flow works in the lives of unschoolers. So can you describe that a little bit more? And then what can get in the way of getting into the state of flow?
Sure, I would love to. There's a psychologist, a Hungarian psychologist, who's done quite a bit of flow research, and his name's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And I love the way he describes it. A person in flow is completely focused. There is no space in consciousness for distracting thoughts, irrelevant feelings. Self-consciousness disappears, yet one feels stronger than usual. The sense of time is distorted. Hours seem to pass by in minutes. Right? That's what we were just talking about, the kind of environment that you want to cultivate for your kids. You've seen those moments, had those moments, right? We've all had them at one time or another. So interestingly, what he describes as being in the flow, Maslow describes as peak experiences, a signature occurrence in his self-actualized state of being. So it's really interesting to see how all these different frameworks come to the same place, find the same place, because it is human nature. It is how human beings like to sink into things. They're both talking about that same thing. So I think when it comes to unschooling and learning, flow happens most often when we're playing in that space where the challenge of the task and the skill of the person is closely matched, right? Because if the task is too easy, we kind of get bored, we don't want to do it anymore. Or if it's too hard, then we're more apt to feel anxious about it if we have to get it done. Back again to the school classroom environment, right? How challenging it is. If something's too easy, you don't want to do it, you get bored, you don't want to do yet another worksheet about it. If it's too hard, we're worried about it, we know we're going to be graded, etc. But with unschooling, we are all about helping our kids follow their interests, right? So they are more apt to be actively engaged in what they're doing because they're interested in it. They're also free to tweak things. So if they're too hard, they step back a little bit and do something a little bit easier. If it's too easy, they step forward. They add a little bit more challenge to it. That helps them find these flow moments more often. And we as parents are also careful that whenever possible, we try not to interrupt them, right, when they're focused on something, because we value that engagement and we encourage and we protect it. So if they're deep into something, I'm not going to look at the clock and it's 6 o'clock and say, okay, come on, you need to come for dinner because it's 6 o'clock. No, the clock isn't important per se, right? If they're deep into something and they're right into it, their dinner can be ready so that as soon as they come out of that moment, it's there to eat. If I think they are probably getting hungry, I might bring the meal to them and just put it beside them so they can pick at it while they're learning, because those engaged moments are fun, right? That is what we want to bring more of in our lives. So I'm not going to arbitrarily try to stop it. I'm going to try to prolong it, try to protect it for them, keep them in the bubble. Maybe I will, take a younger sibling who may be wanting to get in there and play and do something, is looking for some engagement. I'll be sure to engage them and play with them. There's so many things that we can do to help support our kids as they're pursuing their learning and getting into these flow moments.
Great. Pam, I know that you talk more about getting into flow and helping your kids be more motivated and determined in your podcast, but let's jump to the question of how do we go about nurturing strong relationships with our children? How do we create a strong base of connection and trust with them?
Yeah. So there are a couple of things that I often see get in the way when a parent is trying to connect or reconnect with their child. And the first is the parent not honestly evaluating how actively they cultivate those connecting opportunities when they show up, right? So I think it really helps to pay attention to how you respond to your kids when they reach out to you, when they ask you for help. How often do you say yes? Do you consistently help right away? Or do you put them off until it's more convenient for you? And in those moments, do you follow through? I'll help you in 20 minutes when I'm done with this. Do you actually go back in 20 minutes? Looking at these questions can help you see those signals that you are giving to your kids regarding your availability for connection, right? If you keep putting it off and not showing up, they're eventually going to stop asking. And if they recur with that regularity, that is one of those disconnects that we were talking about, right? That is going to get in the way of that healthy give and take in a relationship. The other is often a parent tries to connect by attempting to pull their child to them instead of going to the child, right? That can seem like semantics almost, but it's so important. We think about what we would like to do with the child and we ask them to join us. But the answer when we're disconnected is so often no. Because as part of that, the child doesn't trust that you're suggesting this because you think they would enjoy it, right? So that's a great question to ask yourself. Do you think that's something your child would enjoy? Or is it really something that you would enjoy doing with them? There's a real important difference in there.
Yeah.
So instead, go to them, right? Join them in the activities they enjoy. Don't keep asking them to go on a bike ride because you would love to go on a bike ride with them. If they're enjoying digging in the dirt or if they're enjoying playing a game, go and join them. Take the time to see the world through their eyes. Spend some time observing them, right? So you see the kinds of things that they like to do. Make getting to know them one of your high priority projects. Because it's not about putting in the time with your child, right? It's about using that time to celebrate them, to discover the activities that they enjoy doing, the food that they like to eat, the kind of clothes they prefer, like all those things, and understanding why those are important for your child. Because through your actions, you're showing them that you understand them, that you love the unique individual that they are. That is a real true connection. So we want to cultivate their trust in us by being responsive, right? When they're asking for our help, by being loving and showing our love consistently. That's tying ourselves all the way back to John Holt's words, right? Being consistent in our words and our actions, following through. And by being trustworthy, helping them get their needs met instead of trying to cajole them or even gently control them into meeting our needs, what we think they should be doing. And just understanding that this takes as long as it takes. We don't have any control over how long it takes for someone to come to trust us, but we can be that parent that we want to be. We can be that loving and trusting and supportive parent.
I love how you say that it's not the time that matters, but, what's your advice for parents who want to do it this way, want to educate their kids and give them the freedom, but are working a lot, because they might not be always available to be there to help their child if they have a deadline to meet.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. But that is all part of, what we've been talking about is when you've got that trusting and strong, connected relationship with your children, because that's the foundation, right? We're talking about the value of relationships here. That's the foundation on which so much can arise. It's there that you can work with them and come up with things. Like there are lots of single unschooling parents. There are working unschooling parents. What they've done is made unschooling the priority. They've chosen unschooling to be the priority. So then at that point, that's kind of their fixed point, right? Then they're open to all sorts of possibilities, right? Maybe it's even changing up jobs. Some of them work from home. Some of them work different off schedules from each other. And when you're trying to meet with your kids, if your kids want your attention, try it, do it, and then there's also times where, maybe you're recording a video or something and this isn't a moment, but you have that conversation beforehand and you set them up for success for that hour. It's like, okay, so, what would you like to do that will fill that amount of time? If you come up with a question, text it to me or email it to me or write it down, so that we can dive into it when I'm done. Put a big note on the door that says, Mom's busy for now. I'm so excited to see you in an hour. There are a million ways that you can work with your kid because you can't give an answer. There's no right answer to that question, right? It's all about the individuals involved and how they like to do things. Maybe they want to record a video. Hey, Mom, I just thought of this question and I can't wait to get it answered or to talk to you about this. Because you want to encourage their excitement and their joy, and you don't want to say, I'm unavailable. I won't answer this. It's just a different timetable, right?
Yeah.
So working together to figure out how to work with the timetable that you guys have, that's the important piece. And that's actually going to bring more connection, right? Because you're going to walk out after your call excited. Are there any notes? What did you guys do, right? So it's not that you need to be immediately available at all times. It's that you figure out ways for that to work for your family. Mm-hmm. That makes sense?
Yeah. And I could see this definitely working for kids who are a bit older, who are a little bit more self-directed in their learning. It might be more of a challenge for younger kids, but how does all of this work as the children get older? How does the relationship change?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that I saw anyway was that as our kids get older, they are more able to look up facts for themselves, to figure out those kind of questions. How do I do this? So our conversations in general centered more around thoughts and feelings and morality and principles and behavior. They were more about those bigger picture questions, kind of like as they're sorting out the kind of person they want to be. What would I want to do in this kind of situation? And that is a really important bit, right? We're back to it again, not the person that we want them to be, but we're helping them become the person they want to be. So we're being there for those conversations in whatever timetable works for the family, right? Making the space, because that's also, you can't just sit down and say, hey, dude, let's have that big conversation. But having that space, that opening for them to share those moments, the things that they're contemplating, that's when there's those kinds of conversations bubble up. So, I mean, that was the biggest difference I saw between younger kids and older kids. Mm-hmm. And yeah, with younger kids, they need some sort of attention, as in, somebody there who can get them that glass of water if they're thirsty, if you need to work out, kind of child care kinds of things. That I had single parents who would bring their kids to work, or they would go to a coffee shop to do work, or they would exchange with other families. So that, like with the younger kids, right? So that they were going to another family for a morning where they could have somebody's hands. Because when they're younger, they need another set of hands for the things that they can't do, right? But as they get older, they don't need that as much. Once they're comfortable with being on their own, getting their own drinks, a snack if they're hungry, finding out answers to X, Y, Z, then you're there for those bigger moments. How do they put them together? The real processing conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely takes a village to unschool a child. Seriously, that's my hack. I don't do it all myself. I have other people to help me and doing some of the suggestions that you mentioned. So, well, Pam, I can go on and talk to you forever about this because I mean, I'm dealing with it myself, like wanting to have a really close relationship with my kids, have them learn in a self-directed way, but also work, you know? So I encourage everyone to check out Pam's podcast, Exploring Unschooling. This topic, she goes more into depth with the value of relationships for learning. Also check out her Living Joyfully network and the website livingjoyfully.ca. Is there any other way that people can connect with you and check out your books, or is it all on your website?
Yeah, I think the website's the easiest place to go. You'll be able to find all that stuff, the books, the community. I've been having lots of fun there. That's been, has already become a really vibrant and energetic and inspiring, really. Like just hearing other unschooling families and what's coming up in their days, hearing about their kids. It's beautiful stuff there. So, yep, the podcast is there too. I think Value of Relationships was episode 148. There are over 200 episodes there now. So the whole archive is there for people to discover. So have at it and enjoy.
Yay! Pam Laricchia, you are amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. I hope others watching this will become big fans like I am. So I really appreciate you joining us today.
Oh, thanks so much, Liz. It was so much fun.